Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat, and I am your host of the podcast, and I am so excited to welcome you back to another week, another episode. And this week, I'm so excited to introduce you guys to my friend and client, Nini. And Nini is going to be talking to us today on the podcast about her experience with FCT and how it helped her with the mother wound. And if you listened to episode number 43 a couple weeks ago, I talked to my friend and my neighbor Margot about her experience with Family Constellation Therapy. And she was talking a lot about generational traits with the maternal line and themes in the maternal line that she became aware of through FCT and her introduction to spirituality. But what's interesting about this week's episode is that Nini is deeply spiritual, very insightful, very intuitive, and very aware of family constellation therapy as she's witnessed an FCT happen in person before. So she had a fundamental understanding of what the work is. And she talks about her experience with diving into FCT with me and what the difference was of why she was ready to get into it. It's really interesting because episode 43 is like general stuff about the mother wound. And then in this episode, we niche down a lot and we get into the details of like what the mother wound is and how it shows up with our relationships one-on-one with our moms. So if you liked episode number 43, you're going to really enjoy today's episode. I had a lot of aha moments in today's episode as well, just feeling the warmth and the permission from Nini to feel the way that I feel around healing the mother wound right now in my life. And I've been pretty open about that, how kind of deep I am still in it. And Nini and I talk a lot about that on the episode today. Just a brief introduction of how Nini and I met, because we don't really go into it on the episode. Nini and I joined a intuitive, emotional, like intelligence coaching course, I guess you could call it, last year through a mutual friend. And it was 6 months long. And Nini and I did not like each other in the beginning. We were like, you triggered me. And she's like, you trigger me. And it's interesting because we both thought that each other were like very cold and very like analytical. And it turns out that like we were just basically triggering each other's wounds, and beyond the ego and the trauma was a really deep, beautiful friendship and connection that now the foundation of our friendship is mostly just catching up on Love is Blind and talking about life. But it was a really beautiful connection to be able to be in that space with her and see her truth as she saw mine and how much we had to learn from each other. Enjoy today's episode. I'm really excited for you guys to listen. And don't forget, for the month of April and the month of May, so I'm going to continue this every single month. If you like the episode that you listen to on whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, rate it, subscribe it, review, screenshot that, and send it to me on Instagram. I'll leave my handle in the show notes. I'm giving away one free family constellation therapy session a month to somebody who reviews, rates, and subscribes on the podcast. So make sure that you send that to me on Instagram so I have a place to contact you if you win. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. It means so much as I continue to grow my community and share this incredible work with you. So with that, enjoy the episode and I'll see you next week. All right, Nini, thanks for being here on the podcast. I'm so excited. I always love seeing your face and connecting with you. So thank you for being here on Sweden time.
Yeah, same.
Well, I'm so excited for you to share your experience with FCT today. I think, if I were to look back at the collection of different FCTs that I've done over the last 3 years, ours were really profound and really impactful for me as a facilitator, not only to watch the transformation that you went through, but also partly because you taught me a lot about family constellation therapy by what happened on the papers in the field for you. So I'm really excited for people to hear about your experience, and just thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was one of my best sessions, actually, of anything, or 2 of my 3, whatever we did.
Yeah. I want to start by first introducing to the audience how we know each other. So tell us a little bit about how we know each other, how we connected, all the things.
We met through a Zoom training in energy work, I think was the theme. And I was initially triggered by you, thinking you were like a over ambitious ambition, blah blah blah. person, and you seemed cold, and I had a lot of judgment, which I always do. And then I remember April, who held the training, said that she was so surprised because she thought that you and I would really hit it off. And then we had our first like one-on-one call when I did the FCT for you, and after that it's been like yeah, I mean, you're the only one almost that I stay in touch with. So
it was so the same too. I was so triggered in the beginning by you as well, and I was like, she needs to just say this or do this, or why is it what, like all the things. And I remember then just like something happened, and we just had this moment where we like, I think we truly then were able to see each other, because in the training that we were in for the energy work, it was all about, like seeing people in their truth and like really getting to the root of who people are, discovering their superpowers. And I remember having this moment like a couple of months in, because it was 6 months long, where you didn't trigger me anymore because I saw myself in you. And I was like,
same.
oh, I get her. Like, she triggers me because it's me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I'm so glad that we were able to like move through that, because genuinely you are the only person that I still connect with after the whole experience. And I felt like we found such a real friendship after that too.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So you obviously heard about Family Constellation Therapy through me. I guess I'll re-ask that question. Have you heard about Family Constellation Therapy before me, I guess?
I had done it in like when you dramatize the family, giving people different characters. I had
like
done
in
it
a group,
in groups.
in person?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that I had done. Or I had been a witness. I hadn't done it for myself, but I had been a witness. And so, and for me, it always seemed a bit staged. But I witnessed the people going through it, and it felt really transformative for them. But so I didn't at all know what to expect when doing it with you, just the two of us, and like in a chat room almost in Zoom. So I just came into it really, curious, but didn't know at all, how will this work?
And when you were a witness, I just want to clarify for the audience listening, the way that I do family constellation therapy is and we work in an energy field, and I have you stand on pieces of paper that represent the energy of different people or places or things. But what you're talking about is being in person. Instead of papers, you assign people to be the energetic channel for that person, place, or thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're like channeling that person's energy, and maybe that's what I liked actually more with the way you did it, because it felt I could experience it for myself. It wasn't like someone acting as they thought my mother or whoever was feeling. Now it was me doing the acting, but I could sense the genuinity of the emotions. So that's what I do
like about the papers a lot. I do like that about the papers. So what was going on in your world or in your life around the time that we got introduced to each other, and then this kind of moment sparked where you're like, oh, maybe I could do FCT with Kat on this thing?
Well, I have had a troubling relationship with my mother all my life, and she had just died, actually, I think like a half year, 6 months before we did it, I think. And I wasn't really grieving, actually, because I was done with our relationship, but I wasn't done with her impact on me. And I was so obsessed with not turning into her that I was in almost like a freeze state with that, I think.
And when you talk about a free state, you mean what specifically?
A freeze state, like I couldn't get in touch with my emotions around it, only the judgment parts, I think, like flexible with it. I was just stuck in a pattern of thinking around it that I had been thinking for a very long time.
Would you feel comfortable sharing that pattern of thinking?
We grew up just me and her, or I grew up just me and her, and she was a very lonely person, I thought. And we had this enmeshment relationship. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but just to keep it a bit short, I was so afraid of being like her or turning into her that there were aspects of myself that I had a really hard time accepting. And I felt really blamed. I blamed myself a lot for not loving her in the way that always felt like as she demanded of me to love her.
I think that is something that a lot of women can resonate with. I personally can resonate with that too. I remember when we started going into the FCTs, I remember feeling like, wow, there's just a constant reflection of Nini and her experience happening for me. And that's where I actually learned so much about myself and FCT through witnessing what you experienced. And so I'm so grateful that you were so vulnerable in sharing all of that with me in the FCT, because women say what I always felt which is I'm afraid to end up like my mom. I never heard another woman say that. And so it was really impactful to hear that honesty. And I think that more women need permission to be there with their mothers. I think more women really need that the allowance to just say, this is how I feel. Did you feel like you were loyal to your mom because she was your mother, but aside from that, you didn't really know what else you were loyal to her through?
Yes, exactly. Exactly like that. I mean, because I grew up with just her, I had no siblings and she had never a relationship when I was with her. She and my dad got divorced when I was 4 and she was just living by herself and me after that. So it kind of, I always thought that we had like a very close relationship and people used to view us as really like friends, like close friends. And it wasn't until I never had a boyfriend or anything. So it wasn't until I actually met my then to be husband when I was 25 that I realized, and he became my person, like my new family, that I realized that that our relationship that wasn't that close. I mean, it was close, but it wasn't that good. It wasn't that healthy. And then I actually started questioning her. And I mean, it wasn't as though I was her best friend before that either. We fought like intensely throughout my whole teenage years. And after that as well, it was always this passive aggressiveness. And then it just exploded, me exploding and her giving me the silent treatment for a very long time after that. But to me it was a great realization that, oh my, we're not that close. She's not my best friend, but she wants to be or she acts like it. And then when I had my daughter, she went into this mourning period before I gave birth. We spent the summer, a week in the summer house together, and she said that it was our last time together before everything would change and this daughter would come and like ruin our relationship. And that also made me feel really weird about it. And then when I had my kids, obviously I really started to questioning her parenting, of course. And exactly the same happened with her and her mom, my grandmother. Exactly the same. They were really close, my mom said, when she grew up, and then suddenly they weren't. And all my mother always talked about was that she didn't want to end up like my grandmother. And then she kind of did. So obviously that's why I still have some, I mean, the fear is so much less than before. It's really is a huge change. But I mean, sometimes I need to have awareness around it, I think.
Well, I feel like when people say, well, my grandma did it this way and her mom did it this way, and they all say, you know, I don't want to be like them. What they're missing is a bit of that know-how to move forward. You know, there's a bit of awareness, but there's no real concrete knowledge of like, okay, well, how do I not be like this? I think part of it is like society. Like a lot of women didn't have the resources to know how to do this stuff like it is now. I feel like everybody's healing these days, which is like really beautiful. But I do think that it is interesting. And I would almost wonder, and you'll have to remind me because it's been a while since we did our last FCT together, but I wonder if the fear that you have around not being like your mother is the same fear of why she didn't want to be like her mother, is the same reason that she didn't, you know, underneath that I don't want to be like my mother is actually a much deeper fear of like, I don't want to be like her because why, you know, X, Y, and Z. And behind that is a trauma or an event that happened, you know, that caused things to become this way. Tell us about your mother and her kind of demeanor. Like, what was that you were not wanting to be like?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that she was scared. I mean, that was what I didn't want to be like in regards to the rest of the world or my life. She was scared and she was so afraid of making a commitment, a relational commitment, that she ended up being really lonely. And I don't just mean like a romantic commitment in like every aspect, animal, kids, friends, everything. But in relations to me, she was so focused on me being responsible for her happiness. And I mean, I found a letter when was it the summer that she died, or it was after she died. I found a letter that she had written to me on the computer. That this was the 90s and we only had like a stationary one computer at home, and on the desktop of the computer I found a letter that said help or something. And then I opened it and it says that I want to die. I'm so alone. My life didn't turn out the way I wanted at all. And I'm stuck here with this angry teenager acting like she lives in a hotel. blah, blah, blah. And then I answered. I didn't go to her. I didn't ask her. I answered with my own text document that I left on the desktop of the computer, asking her to not focus so much on me and saying that I wanted to help her and just saying that I hoped that she could find happiness and love outside of me and blah, blah, blah. And then she answered. She didn't come to me and say, because it was always, she also talked about wanting to kill herself. And she didn't come to me and say, oh my God, that was not intended for your eyes. I mean, she knew I was on the computer, so it wasn't like, or how do you feel around this, etc., etc. She just wrote another reply and left it. And we acted like nothing had happened. And she said that you write about me wanting to find happiness, etc., etc. But how do you think that is possible when you refuse to do the dishes or walk the dog? Or all I do is clean up after you. How can I focus on my own life? Blah, blah, blah. And then she went on with calling me really cold and saying that you don't say that you care about me, blah, blah, blah. So it was very blaming. But I think that the thing that I reacted to since like forever was that we never really, or she never really expressed her emotions. We never really talked about what was going on in the room or we could only talk about that after a really, really intense argument. When we made up, then we could have then we can talk about it. But before that, it was like days and months of passive aggressiveness and stuff.
I can't imagine how that would feel for you. The fact that you're a teenager being like, go live your own life, and your mom is holding on so tightly, and that lack of partnership in her life, it probably would have played out with a partner, but because you're there and it's only you two, it's playing out with you. And I do think this happened in your FCT, so you'll have to remind me, but it's really common that if people have a hard time finding romantic relationships in their own lives, energetically, if we put you in the field with your parents, you're actually enmeshed and in partnership with one of your parents. And so a lot of times that will happen because of deep loyalty, especially with single mother raising an only child. That's like very, very common. And so you have to remind me, like, did that happen? I believe it did happen in your first one.
Yeah, it came up. And because we're so, as you say, enmeshed there. And I think that also it was some part when I was standing with my legs like crossed or knees tightening or something, that I felt that I needed to close my legs standing. And I don't know what happened to me or to her or whoever it happened to, but there's obviously some sort of sexual trauma generational wise. So I think that has something, there's a lot of shame. There's so much shame. It's like I can see it in my entire family or everyone going back.
I mean, shame lives in the sacral, which is the womb space. And if there is sexual abuse in the family, that's the first place that it's going to show up. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can think of a lot of women that I support in FCT and even myself who really resonate with that feeling of, I was close with my mom, but we weren't really that close in a healthy way. It was kind of like we just leaned on each other, and my mom kind of used me as her partner, but I'm not her partner. And I really have to commend your teenage self who was like, Mom, just give me some space. So I may have already asked this, but I'm just going to ask it in a more clear way. What was it about FCT this time that made it feel like it was right for you to go into the mother wound? Like, what gave you that feeling of, okay, I can do this, besides the fact that she had just passed and you found yourself in this kind of freeze state?
I think that I had done so much work on myself, working through so much, and the mother thing just kept coming up. I couldn't free myself of it. It was like the only thing that I couldn't push through. The wound, not the relationship, not the bitterness, just the maybe not even the small child in me. It was just the wound of her in me. Like it was almost like she was a ghost within me.
Explain specifically what FCT helped you see in your family and in your life with the mother wounds. Like, what kind of aha moments or clarity did it bring for you that you hadn't, because you said like you were working on this thing and you still felt blocked in it. What did FCT bring that was new for you, or any kind of resolve?
There was a lot, but I could help see, it helped me see that, also helped me accept the parts of me that are like my mother and seeing something like good in that, but also that because the trauma goes back so many generations, and because I have always lived as though I have experienced trauma. And maybe when I tell this story about my mother, it sounds terrible, of course, when I put it like this. I was a bit frustrated that I couldn't grasp the consequences of what happened to me. I couldn't see that it wasn't like enough. The trauma was too small, I thought. And I mean, the trauma is what the trauma is, right? But to me, it was so obvious when we did our thing that it's also an inherited trauma. That maybe the things that I experienced was bad, but probably the things that my mother experienced was even worse. And what her mother experienced was maybe even worse. Not to put a label on it, but anyway, it goes back for so long, and it doesn't even have to be horrible conditions. It's just that the trauma lives and breathes within the people in the family, in like the tissue of the people. And that was really obvious to me. And also that my mother wasn't aware of her trauma. And I think that made it really hard on me, that she never took responsibility for her, because she was like the same. Oh, nothing has happened to me, blah, blah, blah. And I listened to her stories about her upbringing, and I thought, oh my God, it really did. So I don't even remember what your your question was. But yeah.
My mom used to tell me stories about her childhood, and she would laugh about them. And I would be like, Mom, that's literally so traumatic. And it's just like this coping mechanism of like, I'm fine. Like, it's fine. Like, everything's fine. And I'm like, but is it?
Yeah.
Because there's definitely things that I'm noticing that are like not fine. Was there a part of you that was relieved that you could do this as she's crossed over and there was no pressure for the relationship? Or do you wish that there was a part of her that was still here so that you could resolve this, human to human?
Yeah, no, because I mean, the thing that happened before she died is that the year before she died, I went through something. I was in a really bad, then transformative place again. And I kind of let go of her. I stopped taking responsibility for her. And what happened then was that actually it kind of killed her, because she went through surgery and I didn't really take care of her the way that she expected me to. And that was more in an emotional way than in God, it sounds really horrible, but that is actually what happened. And it didn't weigh on me actually, because I had done my work with her in that way. But afterwards, after she died and after we did the FCT, I had so many dreams about her that was really beautiful actually. I remember I dreamt that I came home to her old house where I grew up. She lived there for 40 years. And I came home and I found her in the kitchen. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you were still here. I've sold the house. I've sold all your stuff and you're still here. And she replied, that's fine. I'm okay. I'm just hanging around, but you don't have to take care of me anymore. And and I could remember her being that way, because naturally she had those moments as well, being like a grounded person, being like a mother. Usually she was the child. Sometimes she was the mother as well, of course. And I really made my peace with that I think the FCTs and the dreams, they were so linked because they came in like in a sequence. And that really, it was really, really beautiful.
That is really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. And I can feel, I got goosebumps just feeling the energy of that release for you, and that final deep breath, that sigh, that kind of like, okay, everything, I can just be me now. Did you feel like you had permission to just fully let go after the FCTs and the dreams? Okay.
Yeah. And also when I was standing on the papers, it was such an intense experience, just going with the flow of energy that like went through me. It was really, a profound experience, because I didn't know which paper I was standing on, of course. And afterwards, when we went through it, it also made me judge myself and her and my dad, who was also in it, a lot less. It was a lot of acceptance coming from that as well.
Was there any resistance in you to stop judging them and start accepting them? Or did you feel like the FCT fostered this new like love and respect. I always worry that people are not going to want to come to FCT because they're not ready to accept their parents, but they want to experience the work, right? And it's kind of like, that's like the one thing you do hear people say is like, actually, I don't judge my parents anymore because I totally understand them on a different level. So was there resistance to that at all before or during it or even after?
Yeah, maybe a bit, but because it's like if you accept something, then it's like saying it's all right. But as when we went through the process, that really went away. So it took care of those fears and thoughts.
What were the biggest feelings that you experienced after all three? What did you notice changed in your life, in your experience as a result of, because we addressed your mom and your dad. I remember we addressed your maternal lineage. We addressed, I think we even addressed your great grandparents in one of them too. I remember that one was a really big field, and that was really powerful because I remember that you were standing on one paper, and I don't remember which ones were what, but you stood on one paper, you'd say a piece of information, and then you'd be like, but I'm aware of this paper. You'd go to that paper and you'd literally talk to the other paper. And it's like everybody in the field, I've never seen that before other than yours, like not this intensely, where everyone's literally having conversations with each other based on what's happening in the field. I'm just sitting here like, all right, so when you guys are done, you just let me know what's happening, right? So we went into so much. I'm so curious after all of that, like how did that affect your experience, you being Nini, being in your human experience?
But one thing that happened also was that my daughter was the only one, because I have a teenage daughter, and she was turned away from us. She was like with her back turned, and you were like, she doesn't want to be part of this enmeshment, because I have a really good relationship with her, a respectful relationship, I hope, but it feels as though we do. So I wasn't like, oh, why doesn't she want to be with us? It was more like it was so relieving. It was a healthy choice. Yeah, actually, it's really interesting that you ask that, because it's almost as though I don't really question the mother thing anymore. And I mean, that sounds like a fraud. It seems untrue.
You're cured.
I know I said in the beginning that I'm still afraid to turn out like her in some way, and of course that fear still remain, but nothing really ever goes away. It just gets it gets accompanied by other emotions and other insights, right? So I think I've really made my peace with it, and also that the things that made my mother unhappy, I can see that they're not alive in me. There are other things that may make me unhappy, of course, when I'm unhappy, because we all are sometimes. But those are not the same things. But I can see she comes and goes like a presence. But I think I have let the wound, and I hate to say like it's a black and white thing, but yeah, maybe I'm healed.
Well, I think you said something really beautifully, which is that we're not, the fears may not go away, but the way that you feel about the fear is easier. It's more manageable. It's softer. It doesn't take over your whole identity or your persona anymore. It just kind of exists. And then you notice it and you're just like, oh, well, I worked on that and I'm in control of my own healing journey in some sense. And like, I can do things differently. I'm not a victim to it.
Yeah, exactly. Just like
I would be curious if the age, this just randomly came up, was the age that you found the letter on the desktop computer the same age that your daughter was when we did the FCT?
Yes. I've never thought of that, but yes, it was 15.
Your daughter's already breaking cycles, and you broke cycles. Like, that's the important thing that we have to realize. And you made this point earlier, which is perfect. It's like you don't know what your great grandma went through, but there's most likely a trauma that happened far back in the family system that then kind of spiraled this pattern that hasn't been able to heal until you were like, I'll heal it. But like each generation healed a pattern of something in some way, whether it was just a moment in time where your mom was grounded and she never experienced her mom grounded, and then here you are doing this beautiful work. And I want to touch on breath work, and I want to understand how breath work has helped your healing journey too, because I know that you're a facilitator and you've had such an incredible experience with it. But really, like your daughter, by turning away, even though I don't want to see her turn away in the field, I want to see her in the front facing the future with you and everyone behind her, and celebrate that for her in some way of like, this is bullshit. Like, I don't want to deal with this. And I'm sure had you been 15 doing an FCT, you would have done the same thing. It's just that the patterns played out a little bit differently.
Yeah, and to me, the most important thing is actually my reaction to it. That I wasn't afraid or angry, or I didn't go into like catastrophic thoughts about her not wanting to be part of us, because I feel secure around our relationship, and I trust in myself as a mother, actually. I really do.
And that's probably not something your mom could have done. So
no,
that's really, that's such a gift. I can't even emphasize that enough, that healthy separation. And I think that when parents are in that beautiful place that you're in, where you're like, no, please go out into the world, like be your own person. I'm not going to keep you enmeshed with me anymore. Then it gives children the confidence to then do that, to be who they are, to be confident and secure, and to take up space in the world. So I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
At what point in our journey of FCT together did you start to feel like, oh shit, this is actually like working? Like, it could have been in the session, it could have been after the session, but how did you know personally that the energy and everything was working through you and that you were seeing things change?
I think it was during the session, because it was such a great mix of actually intellectualizing. Is that a word? You know, using your intellect. You were so fast on summarizing and catching up, and you really followed my train of thoughts with it, which is usually really intense and disorganized. So going from that, like really intellectual conversation, and then standing on the papers, like almost in turn, I didn't think that it would have that intense impact like immediately. It was almost like, you know, when you feel like the moment before you realize this, it's happening, you're thinking this couldn't be happening, and then it's happening, and you think I'm faking it, and then you go like, well, maybe not, but if I am, it doesn't really matter, because whatever I'm feeling, the feelings are real, and therefore the experience is real, and then what's actually happening is less important, I think. I mean, because the impact was so good.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. That's usually people's responses. It's like, when I was on the papers, that's when I realized this is actually real. I'm not making this up. And then when we get off the papers and we talk about what papers said or felt what, that's the part that I'm just like, even as a facilitator, I'm like, whoa, this is shocking. I can't even make this stuff up. Like, because you don't know what paper you're on. So you don't know who you're channeling. You don't know whose energy that you're in. You just know that you feel it. A good way to put it.
Yeah, and that's why you go from like first talking, and then going into the energetic field and being totally within the body, within the moment, within whatever is happening, and then you go from that to the summary of it, and then it just clicks. It's like, yep. So you can't really turn away from it, because you get like you can check the box of authenticity right there. And that's, I mean, for some people that's needed, and for me, I'm like a cynic. That was needed for me to validate my experience, I think.
Was it comforting to go over the papers after and see all of the connections between everything?
Yeah, comforting and really, really interesting. It was fun, but also, validating in some way.
Yeah. You mentioned that after the FCTs, that judgment kind of released, and your desire or your need to go into the mother wound kind of dissipated a bit. Did you find yourself implementing things from the FCT that you learned into your daily practice of life? Or did you feel that it was kind of just, not magically, but like, did you feel like it just kind of washed over you and then you were just kind of changed after? Because I've had experiences with both, where I leave an FCT that I'm in and I'm like, oh, like I never have to think about that again. I just know that it's healed. Or there's other ones that I'm like, I'm going to have to work on this for a while.
It stayed with me. I was thinking a lot about it, but I think the insight and the turnover, it had already happened. But you actually said something to me at the end of the session that was like, I think maybe you need to work on your nervous system.
If I had $1 for every time I told someone that after a session, I'd be a millionaire.
And I was really frustrated because at that time I was really, oh, what's the nervous system? It's just this buzzword. Everyone keeps throwing it around. And because when I grew up, my mother always said that we had such bad nerves in our family, and every woman in our family had really bad nerves. So I was like, really, what's nerves? It's like emotions. It's like blah, blah, blah. But that, I mean, because if I hadn't done that, I think that was like the final draw. I don't know how to put it, but I needed to do that as well, because the situation, the wound, the whole generational thing is also like it's imprinted within the nervous system. So even though we worked with it in the FCT and I had this release and insight and beautiful connection afterwards with my mother, I think I needed to work on like the fine tuning of the nervous system as well. And I think I couldn't have done that if I hadn't done the FCT, to put it that way.
I'm so glad you touched on this, because I truly tell everybody after each FCT, for 90% of clients, you need to work on your nervous system, because the nervous system will bring this stuff back up and you'll feel like, wait, I thought I've been working on this, but it's like that fight or flight, freeze or fawn. It kind of just brings it back because the nervous system's trying to keep you safe. But if dysregulation has always been your normal, then regulation is going to feel so unsafe. Moving to is, with FCT, we're taking off the ancestral trauma of chaos, dysregulation, enmeshment, and deep loyalty. And we're literally putting on a new coat of like warmth and safety. And so I'm curious, is that really what kind of catapulted you into breath work? Was, okay, I've done these things and now I'm being dropped deeper into my body.
The thing is that breath work was always just a way for me to get into meditation. It was like a shortcut to meditation, because the meditation was like the end goal. So I just used it as a way to get in touch with my subconscious. So when I did the training, the facilitator breathwork training, I need to like have a checkbox to be able to use this with my clients as a coach, because so much can happen during breathwork. And I think that it's kind of irresponsible to just use it on people without knowing what could actually happen. But then when I started doing it, I realized I learned so much about the nervous system. And then obviously I have learned a lot more from other parts and areas as well. But it's like the gateway into your nervous system. But I didn't start with it to regulate my nervous system. I started with it to feel high on my own supply, or to talk to my subconscious, or to get like trippy, or being able to relieve stress or whatever in the moment.
So for every single person who I've told after an FCT, you need to work on your nervous system, Nini is proof that it works. And it's not bullshit. Yeah. I'm not saying it for no reason. It's real. If you could tell somebody who is skeptical of FCT any piece of advice, what advice would you give them?
I think that if you're skeptical, and I don't know because I've never been to any other FCT person, maybe I have, but not in this particular way. I think that if they're skeptical, this is like the perfect way, because you first get the intellectual validation of your experience by talking about it, and the analyzing in like a very intense short part, and then you get your own experience of it. And that, I mean, it's no hiding from that. It is what it is, and you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And then you get the validation of what happened when you have like the summary with you afterwards. If they were skeptic, I would say, because I have said it to many people after our sessions, that they should really do it. And sometimes people think that it's like sketchy or something. But I think that I would have, if I spoke to someone who was hesitant, I would say talk to Kat about it, or watch a video with you, or whatever. And then I can speak for anyone else doing FCT, because I don't know anyone else. And also, I mean, it's like proven in so many ways that the trauma passes through generations, not only energetically, but like in our genes. So obviously energetic as well. So there's so much that we can't access without going really deep in some sort of session-y form. I think it's hard to go deep with your own thoughts and like a book or even journaling. I needed to experience it. That was the key for me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think there is something to just leaning into the curiosity of it and just letting it be whatever it's meant to be, and letting, it's not that I have anything to prove to a client or the field has anything to prove, because the field is source field, it's consciousness. But it's just like, to your point, I've done so many of these in the last 3 years. I truly, after every single one, I'm like, I don't know how that happened, but it's so magical to me. I don't ever want to stop doing this, because it is so incredible to experience the energy in the field, how everything manifests and works out. Like, it's just so interesting. So yeah, I appreciate that. Any other thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up our chat?
But I think a bit on that what that we touched upon, that I mean, I don't think there's like a one thing that you do and then you're like healed. I think it's a lot of things. But this for me it touched on so many areas that I couldn't really access before doing this work that I did with you. And it was truly transformative. I can really say that. It was an intense and beautiful experience, and also, I mean, an educational experience for the mind as well.
For us analytical people.
Yeah.
I think you and I were some of the more analytical people in our EQ gym group.
Oh yes.
Which is interesting, because it's like, I guess, I think we talked about this, but our trauma was so similar that we were so gaslit with our feelings and, talked out of our experience so many times that we kind of clung to the mind to make sense of our experience and what's happening, while other people cope with it differently. And so I think that, it's just interesting that for someone as analytical as you and I, we also got into spirituality, and something like FCT, it really does meet that analytical piece, but it also meets the spiritual piece, it also meets the somatic piece. It's really a big modality. Yeah. Well, I want to give people opportunities to connect with you on social if you'd want that. Would you be okay with that? Or
yeah, but it's in Swedish, so
they can probably translate it.
Yeah, they can translate the captions. And I mean, I do breathwork sessions in English. So if they want to do a breathwork, they can just DM me or just follow. But yeah, usually it's in Swedish.
Well, I feel like I follow your stuff and I translate it, and I totally get the gist of what you're saying from the caption.
I have some American followers, friends who follow me, and they usually kind of get it.
Either way, if breathwork is calling to you and you feel like you want to be held in a very safe place, especially if you're moving through things that Nini spoke about today, I mean, she is such an expert on it now because she's held space for herself in this. So if you're listening or watching and Nini, her energy, her work calls to you, absolutely go and follow her on Instagram. I'll put her handle in the show notes so that you guys can connect with her. She's just an amazing person to know anyways. So I highly suggest being in her world. But I'm so grateful for your vulnerable share in your journey with FCT. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of women who are also healing the mother wound right now. I know that I got a few good reminders from our chat too. And I'm just really grateful for you being here. So thank you.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you again. Always.